you for years, but you're Jewish, right?
I'm actually not. I'm raised Roman Catholic, but I have a great affinity for Jewish people in Israel.
You're gay. That's what.
To share that in their interpretation of Scripture, I should not be allowed to do what
I can't say my friend's name, but he said his biggest fear is that ISIS or some terrorist group like that will get a hold of a dirty bomb and explode it over a major city within the United States and kill tens of millions of people. Because then the blowback against innocent Muslims would be absolutely terrible.
Yeah, that's horrific.
That's true.
All right, let's do some jokes.
I have heard about a whole lot of hate that's being directed at our trans community.
Absolutely terrible.
All right, everyone, welcome to Redoubt. We have a surprise stream for you today, this Thursday evening. My name is James. We got Christian, John, and our special guest, Wes, with us here today. Before we jump into the main topic, though, Christian, how you doing today?
Good, sir. Hanging in there.
Fantastic. Drinking anything?
Just water tonight.
Just water. Man, you got to up your alcohol game.
I know, man. Boring. I'm boring.
I'm bad influence. John, how you doing?
Well, I'm also non-alcoholic, but this is, again, a Diet Dr. Pepper Blackberry, which is surprisingly good. So
I wish I had
exciting.
some DPs. Yeah, I am out right now. I need to go to the grocery store. All right, and then finally, Wes, how are you?
Doing great. Thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. Wes, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection to the Mormon Church?
Yeah, so just my credentials, speaking on the subject, I was born into the Mormon Church, raised in the Mormon Church, was a member of the church for 18 years. Both sides of my family go way back in the Mormon Church. On my mom's side of the family, actually goes all the way back to the founding of the church. They came across the plains and the whole bit. And so have extended family, and my grandpa specifically, that is one of the leaders of the church. He's not one of the people that you'll necessarily see every general conference or every meeting that they have get up in front of everybody, but he has given some big presentations, big speeches in front of the whole church. And so, if any Mormons are listening, having somebody who has this much experience in the church may hit for them a little bit differently. And somebody who's already had experience with the church might hit a little bit differently than somebody who's coming from the outside. So when we get into kind of the rabbit hole that the church has, because I think it was 2 podcast episodes ago, you guys kind of went into the theological aspects of the church.
Right.
And that stuff's weird enough, but Mormons have a really good way of kind of softening that for people that don't know a lot about the church. They kind of they ease you into the theological side of things, and once you kind of accept some of the premises and that kind of stuff, it might not be too weird to somebody who doesn't know a lot about Christian theology in the first place. But the actual organizational structure and the corruption should be a deal breaker to anybody that knows. Unless you're already deep inside the church, once you know how the church operates, there's no good reason to be a member, at least, unless you're somebody that's benefiting from the corruption. So
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's why I wanted to have you on, because there's only so much we can see from the outside, and especially considering that it seems like there's a 2-tier system in terms of what we're supposed to hear and allowed to hear versus someone with 18 years of experience within it. So, yeah, really excited to have you. Grateful for you reaching out. You sent us a couple clips that will help frame some of what you wanted to say, and so I think that's probably the best place to start, is just pulling those up, and we can, feel free to cut in whatever. Same to you, John and Chris, if you want to pause it and ask a question, but we'll just go ahead and start rolling these.
Right, so this is actually in the context of a modern prophet of Mormonism, correct? This is a BBC video. And let me correct me if I say this wrong, but Mormons are led by a prophet. They always have a prophet, the person in charge. They don't have a pope, they have a prophet, right? Who is elected after the last one steps down or dies. Is that correct?
Right. So just like in Jesus's time, there was Peter, James, and John. Mormons believe that there is prophets that can speak God's will, just like Peter, James, and John did at the time of Jesus.
Do they call them apostles?
Yes. So there's the president of the church. He is the only person that can speak for God on his own. Then he has 2 counselors, which are kind of like his left and right hand. And then there's a quorum of 12 apostles, because at the time of Jesus, he had 12 apostles. And so the Mormon church tries to, say, hey, we've recreated the old in the modern day. And so they've got a quorum of 12 apostles. And this is Elder Holland, is what Mormons would know him as. He is a member of the quorum of 12 apostles, and he's very senior. He's not one of the new ones. He's been around for a very long time. Every one of these members of this, they call it the first presidency in the church, they serve for life. So as soon as they're appointed to the first presidency, they will serve until they die. So usually the more senior you are, the more likely you are to have more important positions, to have been around longer, and one of the things that's really important is that there's actually the oldest member of the Quorum of 12 Apostles becomes the president of the Quorum of 12 Apostles, and he's most likely to become the next prophet. So that's kind of how it works.
Interesting. So you almost have like a trinity at the top. You have the president and his left and right hand man, and then you have the 12 apostles under them. That is interesting. Yeah. All right, well, we'll let this play.
I want to find out more about the mysterious Strengthening Church Members Committee. Off to the church to meet its chief spokesman and the mastermind behind the I Am a Mormon campaign, Michael Purdy. What's the Strengthening Church Members Committee, and does it still exist?
I don't know, and I'm not. I guess that's a question not for me. I couldn't tell you that.
Oh wait, isn't he the spokesman of the church?
Spokesman, yeah.
He's
the
the
PR
chief,
guy.
He's the chief PR for the church.
All right, that goes above his pay grade. Who do you talk to then? That's funny.
And this group that he's talking about, is there any context that we need about this, or does that come later? The strengthening,
Yeah, so the Strengthening Church Members Committee, as you get more into the clips, you'll learn more about it. But officially, the Strengthening Church Members Committee was said not to exist until it was exposed in a leaked memo in 1992. And that was the first time that we had ever learned of the existence of it. And it kind of went back under the radar for a while, but then it kind of came up when Mitt Romney was running for president, and that's when this BBC documentary came out.
And who officially said that it did not exist?
So you'll hear in this interview that Michael Purdy is giving to this BBC reporter, he's going to try to say that it doesn't exist because the church really doesn't like to talk about it. But when they get pushed and like they get backed into a corner, they're like, okay, it does exist, but they kind of whitewash what it does.
But he could kind of plead ignorance. Is there any official statement from the church that says it doesn't exist, or is it just sort of that ignorance game?
So there's official recognition that the Strengthening Church Members Committee does exist, especially after that leaked 1992 memo.
Gotcha.
They came out and they said, yes, it does exist, but it's just a news aggregation service. Like they just go onto online sources, or they go, out there into the print media, and they just gather information about the church and its, members and that kind of stuff, and what people are saying about the church. But It goes a lot deeper than that.
Perfect.
I couldn't tell you that. I don't know.
You're the head of media relations for the church.
Right.
And I've spoken to people, ex-members of the church, who say the Strengthening Church Members Committee does exist. Does it still exist?
I've heard that, there is a Strengthening Church Members Committee, but I couldn't tell you the details of how that works, but we'd be happy to provide someone that can.
Sorry for my confusion. When I originally asked you weren't sure. Now you do know that it exists, and you will give me somebody who knows something about it.
Absolutely.
So on the Strengthening Church Members Committee, the spokesman for the Mormon Church couldn't give me a satisfactory answer. Maybe the apostle could. What is the Strengthening Church Members Committee?
The Strengthening the Church Members Committee was born some years ago to protect predatory practices of polygamists.
I asked what is it?
Well, that's what it is. It is to protect.
So it does still exist?
It does still exist. It does still exist.
And it looks at, it's there to defend the church against polygamists?
Principally. That is still the principal task.
And what is its subsidiary task?
I suppose just to be protective generally, just to watch and care for any insidious influence. But for all intents and purposes, all that I know about it is primarily to guard against polygamy. That would be the substantial, essential part of their work. I'm not on that committee.
So he's an apostle, but he's not on that committee. So this guy is almost the top line. Like, you don't get much higher than this.
Right, and keep in mind, something that Mormons don't know is that there's actually 2 apostles that serve on the committee. So there's 2 apostles, 2 of his coworkers, people that he works with in the same building every single day, are having these meetings in the Strengthening Church Members Committee about these activities. So he clearly knows what the Strengthening Church Members Committee is. He's just trying to obfuscate and plead ignorance, because the more you learn about it, the less you're going to like it, basically.
Do they all meet in the same building? Is there any sort of structure similar to like the Catholic Church where you have cardinals, or well, I don't know. Chris, are cardinals only in the Vatican, or are there cardinals all around?
Oh, let's see. I think the cardinals only. I could be wrong. Chat might have to help me out on this, but I'm pretty sure cardinals reside in the Vatican, and the bishops usually reside over the territory.
Either way, so yeah, Wes, can you kind of provide a little bit of a simile in terms of the structure? Are the apostles all kind of like the cardinals? They're all in the exact same location?
So the way it works is that there's the Mormon Church Office building, and that's a really big skyscraper in downtown Salt Lake City. And that's where they all used to work out of until 9/11. And after 9/11, they thought, okay, this really tall skyscraper in Salt Lake City, for some reason, some crazy, anti-Mormon people are going to hijack an airplane or something and try to take out the leadership. So they actually built a second building that's nearby the main church office building. It's called the Church Administration Building, and it's actually a bunker. Half of it's below ground, and it's only accessible from the parking deck. So I've been in it personally. I got a tour of it, but basically it's only accessible to the people that work there, and it's pretty high security. So
yeah.
So they were scared of a terrorist attack, taking out the entire leadership in one go, basically.
Right.
Talk about Mitt Romney.
Okay.
The man who may well become the most powerful man on earth.
Mm-hmm.
As a Mormon in the temple, I've been told, he would have sworn an oath to say that he would not pass on what happens in the temple, lest he slit his throat. Is that true?
That's not true. That's not true. We do not have penalties in the temple.
You used to?
We used to.
Therefore, he swore an oath saying, I will not tell anyone about the secrets here, lest I slit my throat.
Well, the vow that was made was regarding the ordinance of the temple.
It sounds Masonic, sir. It sounds Masonic.
Well, it's comparable. It's similar to a Masonic relationship.
Potentially the most powerful man in the world has sworn an oath, which he meant at the time, whatever it is now, that he must not tell anyone about what he's seen, lest he slit his throat.
That he would not tell anyone about his personal pledge to the Lord. I'm assuming that any religious candidate, an evangelical, a Roman Catholic, Rick Santorum, Newt Gingrich, President Obama, I'm assuming that anybody who has a relationship to God has made a pledge of some kind to God. There'd be some kind of loyalty to God, or what kind of a God is that?
So that clip at the end there, he gets into a different topic, which is the penalties in the temple, which were done away with in the early 1990s, I believe. I might have gotten the exact date wrong of when they removed that, but Mitt Romney, based on his age and based on when he would have gone through the temple, he would have definitely made those oaths of mimicking slitting his throat and opening his bowels if he were to reveal the secrets of the temple, basically. So he was basically, the reason why that's a part of that is because that apostle is clearly trying to lie around the fact that Mitt Romney clearly made those promises, but they don't want to talk about it because it sounds really barbaric and ghoulish and all that kind of stuff, because that's what they used to do in the temple.
When the vows were taken away in terms of new initiants, were people who had made those vows released from their vows?
No, they didn't even acknowledge it publicly, or acknowledge it within the church that they were making that change. They just changed the wording that the actual temple workers, the people leading you through those rituals, say. So they don't tell you, hey, I want you to make this sign. Hey, I want you to do this. But there's still parts of it in there that are holdovers from when that was a part of the ritual.
When that was a part of the ritual, was that, I assume, did you have to make similar vows?
No, I actually left the church before I went through the Melchizedek priesthood side of the temple, is what they call it. There's the Aaronic priesthood side of the temple, which is where they do the baptisms for the dead, that kind of stuff, which I did participate in. But then once you turn 18 and become an adult, then you get the endowment, is what they call it. And that's where you go through the Melchizedek priesthood side of it.
Gotcha. So when you do make those vows, are they understood to be symbolic, or are they taken literally?
So the history of the penalties in particular in the temple come back to the history of the martyrdom of Joseph Smith. So Joseph Smith was murdered in a jail in Nauvoo, Illinois. And the church then vowed to get revenge on the people that killed Joseph Smith. And so part of the penalties was basically a vow taking that everybody was sworn to secrecy, that if, hey, we get back at these people and we go hunt them down and kill them, that we're all in on it. We're not talking about it, basically. So that's where it comes from. But your modern Mormon member, even at the time, they were done away with, wouldn't have known that. So basically, it's all considered to be symbolic unless you know where the symbols come from, because it's all Masonic symbols. Basically, Joseph Smith was a master Mason before he created the temple rituals, and he borrowed almost entirely, but very, very heavily, from the Masonic order to go ahead and create the temple rituals. So they do prayer circles, they do chants, they do the hand signs, Masonic hand signs there. On the garments, the temple garments, there's 3 symbols on the temple garments, on the magic underwear that Mormons wear.
Yeah.
There's there's one that's supposed to look like a Masonic compass. There's one that's supposed to look like a Masonic square, and then there's one that's like either a circle or something like that. But they're placed in significant spots on your garments, and you're supposed to cut them out before you throw your garments away. So if you ask a Mormon person what those things mean, they just say, well, it's up to interpretation. It's up to what you feel spiritually about those symbols. So they can't give you a good answer. But anybody that knows Masonic rituals and know where those symbols come from could give you a good answer, because that's where it comes from.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I think this is a very, very early rendition of what some of the undergarments look like.
Yeah, but that's exactly where they're at on modern garments.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So I think we have another clip. Do you want to move on to the next one, or are just any more comments on that one?
Yeah, I think we covered the penalties. I mean, it's more from a side of, does it weird you out that they did that, or is it, some people that was kind of the thing when they learned about it, they were like, oh man, this is crazy kind of thing. But for me, it's like with all the Masonic stuff, once you learn where that comes from, it's like, I mean, that's not too surprising given that we're all, chanting in a circle and we're all, doing all the other crazy stuff. That's not too surprising. But
did Joseph Smith's Masonic time come after he had written a bulk of the Book of Mormon or discovered it, or was he a Freemason before all of that, like coming into it?
So if I remember correctly, Joseph Smith tried out a bunch of different religions. One of them, he attended a Masonic temple, right? And which I believe is where he got basically all of the inspiration for a lot of the symbology, a lot of the rituals and whatnot, which is why they're so closely linked together. But I believe that was before his time of, writing the Book of Mormon and stuff like that.
Yeah, as far as I understand, the Masonic rituals that are in the temple were borrowed almost one for one after Joseph Smith learned about them, after he became a Master Mason and was able to, be inducted into that Masonic order. But that was after he had already written the Book of Mormon much earlier on. And so some things I think were a creation of Joseph Smith's own imagination, but those things are pretty much like, you can't deny where those symbols come from. So.
And now when you talk about the punishments for the secret recordings, I don't know if you guys have ever seen these on YouTube, but you can actually go find the secret recordings of rituals that are filmed very covertly. So the punishment for this sort of thing, for talking about what goes on inside the temple or filming it or releasing pictures or whatnot, you get excommunicated, right? Which means you get shunned from your whole family, basically.
Yeah. So basically the penalties would be, spiritually, I guess is the interpretation, that you're slitting your own throat if you're doing this, right? And you're casting yourself into outer darkness, because even some of the most, vile characters from human history, right? You could name off people that are responsible for millions of murders of other humans. They only get penalized by going to the telestial kingdom, which is like the lowest level of heaven. The only way that you get cast into outer darkness is if you know the truth and then you rebel against it. And so I guess that would be one of these offenses, is if you
basically apostasy, right? So demons and apostates, they get thrown into outer darkness.
Right.
And that's something that we kind of talked about a little bit last time, but you probably understand it better. But Mormon eschatology, there's 3 different levels to heaven, but in the highest realm, the celestial realm, the only way to ascend to godhood is to have a temple ceiling with your wife, right? That's the only way to make it to the tippity top level.
Yeah, so there's actually, the way heaven works, according to the Mormon theology, is you have the telestial kingdom, which is like worse than Earth is right now. So, but it's like you're stuck on Earth, but with all of the worst people. So it's like you're in prison on Earth kind of thing. And you're stuck with like all the rapists, murderers, all that kind of stuff, right? Then there's the telestial kingdom, which is like Earth. You're just there with a bunch of people, and some of them are, they just have like mortal problems, right? They might drink too much, they might smoke too much, right? They don't really get any bonus points for their life on Earth, right? And then you've got the celestial kingdom, which is kind of like VIP heaven, where you were Mormon, you're, faithful while you were alive, that kind of stuff. And then there's actually a degree in the celestial kingdom higher than that, where if you get sealed in the temple, then you go into the Holy of Holies and you become a god, basically, in Mormon theology.
And there is no hell?
That's the outer darkness, but you have to really try to get out of there, get out there.
So even the layer of heaven, you said that's with all the rapists and murderers, that's still considered a layer of heaven. That's not the outer darkness. That's one level above. Is that right?
Right, because you're hanging out with Stalin, right?
Gotcha.
Stalin, all of the worst, Pol Pot's in there with you, like everybody that, would be considered to have committed mortal crimes gets to go down to the lowest level of heaven.
And is the outer, so wait, those guys are going into
the Celestial Kingdom.
The Celestial, and that is not the same as the outer darkness, or is
No.
that? Okay. So is the outer darkness just like annihilation, or is it a burning lake of fire? Are you being raped by the devil, or what does that look like?
It's kind of like the idea that you guys brought up in the podcast episode where you said, like, what does nothing feel like? Because the idea in Joseph Smith's theology is that outer darkness is for people that do not have bodies, meaning that if you came to Earth, you passed the first test in the war in heaven, where you were at least valiant enough that in the war in heaven, you passed the first test. So you came to Earth and you got a body. So the worst you can do is be like Stalin or something like that, right? Where you committed a bunch of mortal crimes. So you go to the lowest level of heaven. But Satan and his angels were on the wrong side of the war in heaven, and so they never got bodies. They exist in a corporeal form on this planet, trying to tempt people and that kind of stuff. But they go to outer darkness where they will never receive any sort of form of exaltation because they don't even have bodies.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Cool. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
All right, and now getting back to this committee. So this is at this Radio Free Mormon Spying for the Lord on Mormon's Discussion Inc.
So the reason why I bring this into a discussion on Mormonism is because for most people that are in the church, how the church works on the inside isn't even a topic of conversation, right? The church is run by a whole bunch of different committees. And for the most part, the church kind of looks like this unified form, this unified structure to the outside, to people that, are living in the church, just going to church every Sunday. But there's these different committees that actually run the church. And this is one of the most important ones because it actually affects the lives of daily members. And so that's why it's really important that Mormons learn about it. And when they learn about it, they're probably not going to like it.
It is generally understood that the Strengthening Church Members Committee, or SCMC, keeps files on dissident Mormons, those that they consider to be vocally critical of the church and its leaders. And once again, when those dissident Mormons are considered to have crossed some threshold of being too critical, too vocal, too popular, that information in the file is then passed on to the members' local leaders for disciplinary action. I have known about the existence of the Strengthening Church Members Committee for a number of years now. I have known about the rumor that they keep files on dissident members of the church, and I have long suspected that they must have a file on Radio Free Mormon as well. I have also been led to understand that it is very likely that the church believes they know the true identity of Radio Free Mormon, that they know my name. And that sets the background for what happened earlier this morning, May 1st, 2019, when I had a nice chat with a member of the Strengthening Church Members Committee. He is a general authority, he is a member of the First Quorum of the 70, and his name is Timothy J. Dykes, D-Y-C-H-E-S. The funny thing is, he didn't call me. I called him. Here is how it came about. Early this morning, I was contacted by Bill Reel, advising me that there is a teenager, he's about 18 years old, who listens to the podcast. And he also frequents Ex-Mormon Reddit, which is a message board where dissident members of the church gather to express their feelings about the LDS Church. While he was on Ex-Mormon Reddit, this teenager read a comment that somebody had made about how Radio Free Mormon's neck is in the SCMC noose over his latest podcast, President Nelson Jumps the Shark. This teenager learned of the existence of the Strengthening Church Members Committee from this post. He learned that the SCMC has files on dissident Mormons like Radio Free Mormon, and that the SCMC surely had a file on Radio Free Mormon, and that disciplinary action would no doubt be shortly forthcoming. This was the opinion of the person who posted the message at ex-Mormon Reddit that was read by this teenager. Now, this teenager...
Now, when it comes to Radio Free Mormon, they are Mormons, but they are more dissident, or they cross a line that the church doesn't like. Is that what I'm guessing from this?
Yeah, so he podcasts with like a conglomerate of different shows. It's called Mormon Discussions. And you have a variety of different voices in that. You've got some people that were Mormon are no longer. Some people that have been excommunicated by very publicly by the church, but Radio Free Mormon is anonymous, and so far he hasn't been excommunicated, even though the church believes they know who he is. And now he uses his face on podcasts and stuff, but just he stays anonymous for kind of his branding.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. So we have some Mormons in the chat that are disagreeing with you, West. They're calling you out for not knowing your stuff. And I mean, I don't know how the other hosts feel, but if they want to have a discussion at some point in the future, I would be more than happy to listen to them as well.
Yeah, I mean, if Mormons want to fact check me on dates or on, very specific theological points, you got to remember, like, this was 6 years ago for me. So I'm trying to remember 18 years. And it's one of those things where Mormons like to say, well, if you don't know your doctrine down to the very letter, the very, that kind of stuff, then they like to throw everything out, right? Because they're just looking for something to nitpick. And at the end of the day, the content of what I'm trying to bring to the table is they don't know that the church has an internal Stasi. Okay. It has an internal spying agency that spies on members, and they don't have any curiosity to know more than that, right? You can talk to a member of the church and say, hey, did you know that the Strengthening Church Member Committee exists? And they're like, no, I had no idea. And you tell them about it, and they're like, well, yeah, that does seem kind of serious. And, I feel bad for those people that, I feel bad for those, dissident members that, get the bad end of that stick. But, I'm a good, faithful member. So why should I care? They're not spying on me, right? And it's like, well, the problem is that if you think that the church treats its, is willing to spy on bad people in the church, quote unquote, bad Mormons, right? Then what do you think they do with the good members of the church? You think that they're just like, oh, okay, these good members of the church, we're going to treat them great. It's like, no, they think you're all marks. Okay. They think that you're all lemmings, basically. And they think you're stupid. So that's what I'm trying to say. Like, they single out people that speak out about the church because they kind of have like some free thinking, or they, try to find the truth and they speak out about it. And they try to get those people out of the church as quickly as possible. But for the people that are just like your average members, right? They don't even give you the time of day to ask your opinion. They just do what they're going to do and want you to pay for the privilege, basically.
Is not just an average teen. His grandfather is a general authority 70, also a member of the First Quorum of the 70, but he is not Elder Dykes. The teen talks to his grandfather about different issues relating to the church. Now, obviously, this teenager, if he's listening to my podcast and frequenting ex-Mormon Reddit, is probably not entirely orthodox in his beliefs. But he talks with his grandfather about his questions relating to the church, and his grandfather is nice enough to talk with him in trying to answer those questions. Now, by the way, I am not using this teenager's name or the name of his grandfather because I don't want to inadvertently dox him. I know the name of his general authority grandfather, but if I gave the name of the general authority grandfather, I would be doxing the kid just as much as if I said the name of the kid himself. Anyway, the teen's grandfather, the 70, said he knows another 70 who does work on the SCMC, and this 70's name is Elder Timothy J. Dykes, the one I've already mentioned to you. After checking with Elder Dykes, the grandfather got back to his grandson to say that the grandfather had spoken with Elder Dykes and that the SCMC does in fact have a file on Radio Free Mormon. But the grandfather 70 went further. He gave his grandson Elder Dykes' telephone number. He told his grandson he could pass it along to Radio Free Mormon, and that Radio Free Mormon could give Elder Dykes a call to discuss the contents of his SCMC file, and that Elder Dykes would be expecting The call. All of this information was related to me by Bill Reel on the morning of May 1st, 2019. Well, as you can imagine, it was all too much for me to resist. So I called the phone number provided. It was 801-240-3305. I frankly wasn't sure whether this was a real phone number or whether it would actually go to Elder Dykes, but I thought I would give it a whirl anyway. Well, a very pleasant lady picked up on the other end and advised me that I had reached the office of Elder Timothy J. Dykes and asked how she could help me. I told her I was calling for Elder Dykes and that he was expecting my call. She asked for my name. I thought saying Radio Free Mormon would raise more questions than it would answer. I mean, my whole goal is to get past the receptionist and to Elder Dykes, so I'm trying to make this as quick and painless as possible. So I don't want to say it's Radio Free Mormon, so I just made up a name because I didn't want to give her my real name either, for obvious reasons. There is a reason that this podcast is anonymous. So I just made up a name and told her my name was John Smith. Yes, that's actually the name that I thought up on the spur of the moment. I will get less than high marks for my creativity there. She asked what this was regarding. I told her it was a bit of an unusual situation, but it was my understanding that Elder Dykes serves on the Strengthening Church Members Committee, that he has a file on me, and that he is expecting my call to discuss the contents of my file. This did not seem to faze her in the least. She did not express confusion, shock, or misunderstanding. She did not say, "What is this Strengthening Church Members Committee of which you speak?" She understood exactly what I was talking about and said she would check to see if Elder Dykes was available to talk with me, and she put me on hold for about a minute while I listened to some very nice classical music. When the phone picked up again, it was the receptionist's voice. I expected her to say that Elder Dykes was busy or unavailable and couldn't take my call at the time, but instead she said she was transferring me through to Elder Dykes. A moment later, Elder Dykes picked up the phone and identified himself. I told him I had used the name John Smith with his receptionist, but that my name was not really John Smith, but that I podcasted under the name Radio Free Mormon. I told him that this was a bit of an awkward phone call, but that I had learned through a circuitous route that Elder Dykes serves on the Strengthening Church Members Committee, that he has a file on Radio Free Mormon, and that he might be expecting a call from me to discuss its contents. Elder Dykes identified the name of the grandfather 70 and mentioned the teenage son. He knew exactly what was going on and why it was that I was calling, and he indeed was expecting my call, as I had been informed by Bill Reel. And I told him, yes, that was exactly the circuitous route that I was talking about. Elder Dykes told me that he did not want me to use the contents of our conversation for any purpose whatsoever. I assured him I was not recording the call because I live in a two-party consent state and I wasn't about to break the law. We both got a good chuckle over this. Elder Dykes said he usually would talk with people who came in person to his office as opposed to over the phone. I told him that was difficult considering I lived in another state. He understood the difficulty. Elder Dykes at this point confirmed that he does serve on the Strengthening Church Members Committee and that he does have a file on a member of the church whom he identified as being Radio Free Mormon. He mentioned that member's full name to me and asked if I were that individual. I told him I could not confirm nor deny whether I was that individual, and we both had a good laugh over that one. Elder Dykes said he was not comfortable talking with me on the phone about the contents of my file unless I were willing to positively identify myself as the member he believes Radio Free Mormon to be. I asked him that if his file is on Radio Free Mormon, and I have identified myself as Radio Free Mormon, then why couldn't he talk with Radio Free Mormon about the contents of his file? Elder Dykes reiterated that he wouldn't feel comfortable talking with me unless I positively identified myself as the member he believes Radio Free Mormon to be. I told him that I guess that takes care of our conversation then. I thanked him for taking the time to accept my call and chat with me. I wished him a good day, and he did the same to me. A few thoughts. Number one, Elder Dykes was very pleasant and cordial. We both shared laughs over the unusualness of the situation. He seemed genuinely sincere when he wished me a good day at the end of our conversation. Number two, it is now confirmed that the Strengthening Church Members Committee really does exist. Yes, Virginia, there really is a Strengthening Church Members Committee. Not only did it exist back in the 1990s, but it continues to exist today. Not only that, it is confirmed that Elder Dykes of the First Quorum of the 70 is a member of the Strengthening Church Members Committee. Strangely, if you go onto the church website and look at Elder Dykes' official biography, there is no mention of his being a member of the Strengthening Church Members Committee. This is what it says there. Elder Timothy J. Dykes was sustained as a General Authority 70 of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints on April 6, 2013. At the time of his call, he was serving in a Ward Young Men presidency. He served as a member of the Europe Area Presidency from August 2013 to August 2016, and is currently, note that word, and is currently serving at church headquarters as an Assistant Executive Director in the Temple Department and Chairman of the Restoration and Cancellation Committee, period. End of quote. No mention is made of Elder...
So that's the relevant portion of that podcast that I wanted to bring up. But that at the end is really notable because the Strengthening Church Members Committee does exist. It has been acknowledged by the church, but they don't talk about it openly. Like, you have to basically ask them directly, force them to either lie about it or confirm it before they tell you about it.
So what are the lies they tell about it, West?
So the one that they like to say is that it's a news clipping service. They like to say, oh, okay, well, we just go out into the public arena and we try to see what people are saying about the church, what they're saying about church leaders, church members, that kind of stuff. And we get little news clippings, news articles, and that kind of stuff. And we kind of gather that into the church, and they kind of, digest all that information for us. And if we need to make some decisions about the things that people are saying, then we make them through that. The thing about the Strengthening Church Members Committee is that it's specifically for internal reasons. It doesn't care about what people on the outside are saying about the church. It's specifically about what people inside the church are doing and what people inside the church are saying. There's plenty of committees for the church, to handle PR with, or to handle, all sorts of different things that are publicly facing, that they're totally open and, transparent about, right? It's the internal Stasi, basically, is what they're secretive about. And the things that the Strengthening Church Members Committee does, and this is all coming from an interview with Kate Lynn Whitaker. She actually used to be a church. She used to work for the church. She used to be a church employee, and actually did some part of her time during her service as an employee of the church. She did work with the Strengthening Church Members Committee. So she actually went on record and recently, about 5 months ago, made public a lot more information about it. And so what they do is half of the Strengthening Church Members Committee, or a part of it, is they take reports of crimes that have been committed by church members. So this could be important leaders of the church. This could be people that are in positions of authority, or it could even just be like, a member of the church, right? If somebody is found in the newspaper for murdering somebody, right? And there's a report about that, or, sexual assaults or child abuse or anything like that. That gets gathered up by the Strengthening Church Members Committee, and then they send letters to your local leadership, and they basically recommend disciplinary action for that person, saying, hey, this person, was found, was caught by the police for suspected murder. We really think that there should be some ecclesiastical action against this person.
And are these only civil crimes, or would these also include just things that were not illegal but were, are frowned upon by the church?
Well, that's the thing, is that that's one part of their responsibility, is if it's something that's serious enough that it comes up in the news, like, somebody murdered somebody, somebody committed rape or sexual assault or anything like that, something that's high profile that the church could receive some blowback for, then they try to get that person out of the church, because the last thing they want is like, hey, this person was thrown in jail for pedophilia, right? And then they come out of prison, and they try to come right back to church, right? And they show up in church, and then like, oh my gosh, now you have a pedophile in church, right? So that's a legitimate reason that the church, should keep a watchful eye over, like, hey, do we have members that are running afoul criminally, right, that we don't know about, right? That's a legitimate reason that they should, do some surveillance, right? But they then have their persons of interest part of the committee. And the persons of interest are people that haven't done anything wrong criminally, right? They're usually persons of interest for apostasy reasons. So, I just wanted to mention the last clip is we can talk about that one for a while. It's about the IRS and the
money, basically, which
money side of the church, which is a big topic.
Yeah, for sure. So before we jump into that, I'll let you go in a second. The excuse that was given in the first video we watched was a polygamy watch committee, essentially. What's all that about? Was that an old story that was told, and what is that even referring to?
Yeah, so I think that was kind of just like a cope, for lack of a better term, because polygamy is completely outlawed and disbanded within the proper Mormon church, right? I can't talk about, hey, there's some fringe radical external element that is not a part of the church. I've heard stories about, people trying to break into the Salt Lake Temple to like perform sealings, for polygamous families and that kind of stuff. Crazy stories like that, right? But it's not anywhere within the church's main structure. And so what it comes down to, at least in this life, there's the whole theological having multiple wives in heaven, that stuff. But the main thing about it is none of the persons of interest that Caitlin Lynn Whitaker talks about were ever suspected of polygamy or practicing polygamy or anything like that. There was one person on the list that was like claimed that she could speak to the dead. Like she claimed that she could, speak to dead relatives of people and that kind of stuff. But most of them are like podcasters, people who talk and give, interviews, even people that are like scholars who do like academic research on like the Book of Mormon and that kind of stuff, that take a less than faithful view of the Book of Mormon and that kind of stuff. Those are the people that the church considers persons of interest.
Gotcha. John, did you have a question?
Well, yeah, so it comes from a commenter. So we're getting some Mormons in the chat, and I think that's wonderful that they're here hanging out. So a committee designed to refute false and defamatory claims, ? If you're a member making those claims publicly, do you not expect discipline from your local church leaders? Well, I don't think that, from the way that it's framed in this, is that they'll go after people who are even just questioning things a little too hard. Right. Is
so,
not just false or defamatory claims, but if you're like asking the wrong questions or, bringing up the wrong things, you can get a file written on you in this committee.
Right. And it's really comes down to like, if you're like a hardcore, like it's my way or the highway Mormon, right, where there's no chances for any sort of interpretation of the Bible unless it's like written down by the church itself, then you could, interpreting the Book of Mormon and all the scriptures and the modern day prophets, what they say, then you might say like, oh yeah, they can lay down the band hammer and just like get rid of whoever they want, But the problem is that what they go after people for is like legitimate criticism of policy things, not even just scripture things. Like, hey, we don't like it how the church handled this situation. Totally irrespective of...
Do you have any specific examples of that?
Yeah. So the Mormon church has been very reluctant to include it. They've been opposed to any push to change the mandatory reporting rules for ecclesiastical leaders in Utah, meaning that, say you're a bishop, which is like the church level, the local level leader of the church in your area. You go to your bishop and you say that some member of your family has sexually assaulted you, right? And you confess that to your local member. it is not currently in Utah law that person is mandated to then make a police report that sexual assault happened. Now, he may try to, if he's a good member of the church, right, he may try to put a notation in that person's record or something like that, but he is not encouraged by the church to make any sort of report to law enforcement. He may do that on his own, but the church won't tell him to do that. And
now you said two things. You said he's not mandated. Is he encouraged, or is he not even encouraged?
He's not even encouraged. It's basically the church tries to keep confidentiality between members and their ecclesiastical leaders.
To avoid scandal.
Yeah, they say there's like privilege there. Like you're talking to your lawyer, basically. Like,
gotcha.
And the problem is that the way the church works internally is that there's sometimes this impetus to let's just handle it internally, right? Oh, we'll discipline this person for whatever reason internally within the church, but we won't get the law involved because we feel like we can handle it. But the problem is that there's a chance of reoffending if that person's not put on a registry, right? Then even outside the church, people won't know that kind of stuff. Maybe it's working with kids.
Well, not to mention it's a crime, right?
It's a crime, right? Absolutely. And so there's this guy named Sam Young who a couple years ago, back in 2019, led a protest movement to encourage Utah lawmakers to change the law so that ecclesiastical leaders would become mandated reporters, and he was excommunicated for that.
So they're trying to have it like a Catholic confession, basically, where it is actually privileged information between you and your priest in this case.
Right, but it even comes down to, hey, it's not the person directly confessing to you, but maybe it's the victim, right, came to you and confessed and said, hey, this happened to me. That's not like mandated, like, hey, you have to make a report about that.
Gotcha.
So I have a question for you, West. I reside in Utah as well, and I've talked to some current Mormons and ex-Mormons as well. And they've said there's like a process of getting their records expunged from the church. Is there any validity to that, or is that kind of BS? Or I don't know if you can kind of go in on that.
Yeah, there's a pretty complex legal route that you can take to have your records removed from the church officially. If you don't want to be included in their, like, whatever, we have this many members, whatever, you can go through a law firm. You have to have a lawyer represent you, send a letter to the church, and they will process the paperwork in order to have your membership removed. But they do it in batches, where they like to do it kind of all at one time, so the numbers kind of even out. So they'll like remove a bunch of names all at one time and add a bunch of names all at one time.
To kind of keep the membership level even, essentially.
Right.
In a way?
But
okay.
Yeah, so it can take years sometimes before you officially get that letter that your name has been removed.
Gotcha. Okay. Interesting.
Guys, we have a number of Mormons watching. Open invitation to any of them. I don't know that we can have all of them on if you all volunteer at once, but right now West has volunteered. If anyone wants to come on, just shoot an email to regardingdoubt@gmail.com, and we can send you a link, and we can get you on if you are interested. Again, regardingdoubt@gmail.com. And let us know in the chat too, just in case we're not looking. But yeah, I think that I'd love to get some back and forth, make sure that we're getting the right information. If there's another perspective, we certainly want to hear it. But this has all been fascinating for a couple of outsiders for sure. And West, again, thanks so much for being on. Also, like and subscribe, especially like. I see there's a lot of people viewing live, but we don't have as many likes. So if you get a chance, please do hit that like button.
Yeah,
would you guys like to move on to the last section before we, or do we have anything else here to clean up first?
No, that's perfect. Basically, this is a look into the bottom of the rabbit hole, right? You can get into like all sorts of different layers of Mormon history, the theology, all these different things that you can talk about. I'm trying to peer down into the bottom of the hole and give an outsider a perspective of, hey, here's some really dark stuff that most Mormons don't know about when they're in the church, but even a lot of ex-Mormons that leave the church never learn about, because you have to dig really far down until you get to the point where you're like, oh, the church actually does spy on its own members. Just as a final point on that, Strengthening Church Members Committee, in that interview with Caitlin Lynn Whitaker, she says that the Strengthening Church Members Committee does send covert people into, like, for example, ex-Mormon Facebook groups or that kind of thing to gather intelligence or gather information on people that are anonymous on the internet, right? But maybe saying things about the church that are less than faithful. And the most extreme thing that has been confirmed, but they go into in that interview, is that they, in extreme cases, will actually hire private investigators to go undercover and to become friends with particularly high-profile dissident Mormons and try to get them paired up so that they have a man on the inside. And they actually did that with that guy, New Name Noah, that guy who did the internal temple cam, like he did the secret camera footage inside the temple. They actually had a private investigator try to become his friend and try to figure out how he was getting into the temple and how he was, like, doing his whole thing.
Getting the recordings and whatnot. So interesting.
Yeah. So when I say it is the Stasi, like, it is the Stasi, right? It's not
that's something that's always been silly from the outside looking in, is these uber secret silly ceremonies that go on the inside of the temple. Like, are they just that silly that if you get approached with this information on the outside, it might scare you off, so they wait till you're a little bit deeper in before you get exposed to this side of the Mormon experience?
Yeah, they definitely try to downplay it inside the church, but they definitely don't want that just being available on the internet.
So, West, as I understand it, you left before getting to some of the higher levels where you would have received a lot of the more advanced knowledge, so to speak. So where do you feel that your perspective is limited because you haven't seen that, or do you have an inside look just because of the family connections?
Yeah, so one of the things that Mormons like to say is, well, you'll understand it better when you go through it, right? When you actually make those oaths, you actually go through the rituals.
They say that in Scientology too.
Yeah, it'll make sense to you. The reason why I didn't go through that, even though it would have been very easy for me to do that from hey, I'm just going to try to do this to get along with my family kind of thing, I believe in those oaths, right? I believe that oaths are powerful, and that if you don't keep your oaths, that says more about you than it does about whatever, you feel like you had to go through. So I wasn't going to go through those ceremonies, which a lot of my family take very seriously, and then just disrespect them and say, hey, I'm going to talk about this openly, and I'm going to be, critical of all this kind of stuff. Because if you take those oaths and you believe that they have meaning, you wouldn't be able to get on a podcast like I am and speak openly about this stuff. So I went up to the line where I felt like I had personal autonomy to speak my mind and still have, my own opinions about things. But I didn't take any, I didn't make any promises where I, couldn't speak openly about what happens in the temple, for example, right?
Because you didn't make those oaths, so you feel like you have more free reign to speak, right?
Exactly.
Do you think there are some ex-Mormons who feel convicted to not speak, like they would prefer to say things, but they're not because of those oaths?
I think most people that have been through the temple, they kind of feel like, especially if they have Mormon family, that it's disrespectful because it's considered to be deeply spiritual on a personal level. And so it's kind of like, if you were speaking about, the last words that your grandma said when she died or something like that, right? You wouldn't speak about that flippantly or in a way that, was disrespectful to your grandma. So I think a lot of even ex-Mormons that kind of go away quietly and they don't, speak on the internet or anything like that, they just kind of feel like, I'm just not going to talk about my experience in the temple because either I don't want to ruffle feathers with people I know, or I don't want to be disrespectful of that experience.
Gotcha.
Well, right, and the consequences for speaking out. So you can lose your temple standing, right? So you won't be in good temple standing. You don't have access to that sort of thing. But if you actually speak out against the church, then you get excommunicated and shunned, right?
Right, and the shunning culture is depending on who your family is, can be very intense. Like, for example, on my dad's side of the family, the shunning culture is very heavy. So I don't believe I'll get any sort of inheritance, for example, from my dad or anyone in his family, because they're stance is that they write anybody who's left the church out of their wills.
Wow. So, is there a certain amount of second level shunning? Do people get shunned for associating with you?
I mean, I'm not like the most popular person at family gatherings, I guess. Just from the perspective of, it's kind of like you have the ick, I guess. They throw the ick on you, and anybody that gets too close to you, they might get the ick too, because, hey, we've got this one person that doesn't think like everybody else, might have different opinions, religiously, but even like politically, right? Like they're very cut out of the same cloth politically as well. And so if you get too close to that person, then you might start thinking like them. And so, I was very close with a lot of my cousins and that kind of stuff, but unfortunately through the process of time, we have grown a little distant, just because it's very difficult to maintain those family ties when, people are going to start asking questions.
Yeah. So I understand there's a decent amount of discretion in terms of how families want to do it. Are there official guidelines for like a minimum amount of shunning that's required?
I think the church takes the perspective of, you should want to surround yourself with the best Mormons, right? There's even people called like Jack Mormons. I don't know if you know this, Christian. Jack Mormons. They drink, they smoke, they don't follow the rules, but they're still culturally Mormon. They still go to church. They still, show up to ward activities, whatever. Those people are considered to be like bad examples, but they don't necessarily, if you're fun and you're like, chill, like you can hang out with the Jack Mormons because they're more normal, right? They do normal stuff when they're outside of church. But if you're like a card carrying Mormon where you have your temple recommend, you're like trying to stay away from any bad influence, right? I don't want to be around anybody that smokes, anybody that drinks, anybody that might have the ick, because when I go to my bishop and I have to like, I get asked all these questions about whether I've been faithful and that kind of stuff. I don't want anything to come up where it's like, hey, we've seen that you've been hanging out with so-and-so. You haven't been going out to drink on the weekends, have you? Right? Like, you don't want to get grilled, I guess, on that.
Wes, if you don't mind me asking, where are you currently in terms of your spiritual journey?
So my spiritual journey was very complex. I started out just on kind of the Mormon history side of things, where I kind of felt like, hey, the church isn't true because of the history of Joseph Smith and the theology and that kind of stuff. But the church is a good organization, and you have good community. And so you can have like your family in the church, and, you have that community, you have those people around you that are good people. And so it's a good organization to be a part of. Once I started learning about the corruption side of things, and especially because I was able to kind of see behind the curtains a little bit with my family, I was like, man, it doesn't matter what you want to do in this church. If you feed into the system in any way, it's not going to a good cause. It's not going where you think it's going. And that's where like the money side gets into it, is where does the money really go? It doesn't go where most Mormons think it goes.
Well, that seems like a good segue. Yeah.
That is a good segue. I do want to ask about that specifically because it leads into this, but the tithing in Mormon culture is extremely strict, like down to the penny strict, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, pretty much.
Let me pull that up for everybody here.
I assume that means that Mormons just include a buffer in all of their tithing, right? They do like 11% rather than 10 or something like that, just to give them some buffer. Or how does that work in practice? I'm sure we're going to see a little bit more.
Yeah, in general, like most Mormons, like you get your tax return back, right? Or if you break it up by month, like you break up your income by month, and you pay, if you're a letter to the letter following Mormon, you'll pay on your gross, which means before you pay taxes, before your insurance comes out, before any benefits comes out, anything, you pay on your net, your gross income. And so they'll just take 10% of that, and they'll either break it up by month or do it in one lump sum at the end of the year, and they'll give that to the church.
Gotcha. That is pretty. That can be pretty intense. Do they have it to where they have automatic drop-offs, or how does that work, or is it still
auto pay?
Like you write a check? Well, I mean, I have an auto tithe system that I use. It's I think Tithely is what they call it, and that's what our church uses. So that's what I use for it. But I don't know if they have like Mormon auto pay or whatever it is.
Yeah, within the last 10 years, I think they came out with a way of being able to do it online where you don't have to physically hand money to the bishop, or you don't have to like bring in a check and hand it to the bishop. But some people still do that, where, you know, you'll see the bishop walking around and people, you know, tap on his shoulder and hand him an envelope with some money in it. And it's one of those things where we'll get into it, but people, older folks, especially in the church, I've seen grandmas, you know, well up there in years, receiving Social Security benefits, pay tithing on their Social Security when they were using that to buy groceries, right? There's something in the church called the widow's mite. There's like a concept where you are encouraged. Yeah, you are encouraged to pay tithing even if you don't have enough money to buy groceries, even if you don't have money to, you know, turn on the electricity to your house, right? Because they believe that the spiritual blessings that will come from paying your tithing will outweigh the consequences of whatever else in your life could use that money. And so when you learn about where the money goes, it's just that much more impactful that you have people that, you know, are receiving retirement benefits and are paying 10% of that to this church.
Now, I might be in the minority here, but I guess I don't see I don't so much have an issue with that. In principle, I guess I do see tithe as being the first fruits, regardless of how much you make. You should, I mean, understandably, if you're in a situation where you need it to buy food, it's a principle. It's not the kind of obligation where people should be, you know, checking up on you in a sense, and that's never something that you will see in Protestant churches, certainly, and even Catholic churches. I think they're even more laissez-faire about it. But I don't know, Christian, John, what do you guys, in terms of your tithing, do you see mostly tithing on the gross or tithing on the net? And how do you guys view tithing, just from a biblical perspective?
Personally, a tithe is usually of the first fruits, as it's mentioned in the Bible, right? But I'm not sure if that quite applies to modern day, where, you know, we have modern tax laws and different, you know, things like that. So I don't know exactly like how that works to the letter of the law in like modern Christianity.
Right.
I just try and keep it as simple as possible personally. But the question I have is, let's say I'm a well-to-do member of my local Mormon church. They know that I make $250,000 a year, but they know I don't tithe $25K a year. So do they give me a little nudge, wink, wink, like, hey, buddy, you need to be given a little more, or is there anything like that?
If they knew that you were really undercutting the amount of tithing that you were paying, and you were doing it after they kind of, you know, hey, is all your tithing paid in full, is what they ask. I'm not sure exact wording, but that's what they ask you in the Temple Recommend interview. And if you answer that like, oh yeah, I definitely do pay all my tithing, and then they, you know, had good reason to believe that you weren't, they just pull your card. They just say, okay, well, your ability to go to the temple is now revoked. You're going to have to, you know, basically make this all, you know, right before you can go back to the temple. So they pulled your key to heaven, basically. That's what they did.
Yeah. Well, at that point, you just get kicked out. You just get kicked out of the celestial realm, and you get to go to the telestial realm, right? Because you're not an apostate. You're just a bad Mormon, I guess.
Yeah, it's just now you've got this impetus to kind of make it right, where it's like, okay, well now everybody knows I'm going to have to wait outside the temple whenever we have a temple trip, or I'm going to have to wait outside the temple when one of my kids gets married in the temple. Like that's true.
Yeah.
That's
you can't see your kids or anything like that. Mm-hmm.
That's a serious shaming aspect of, like, if you don't have a temple recommend, you can't watch, you know, your cousins, your aunts, your uncles, even your sons or daughters get married in the temple.
Well, and that's something, I don't know if you know Alyssa Greenfeld, but she's talked about a lot. Like when she left the Mormon church, she knew that she could not see like any of her friends or family or any of them do any of their things again, just because she wouldn't have access to the temple. So when her and her husband were deciding on leaving, you know, that is a contributing factor, is that you will, by definition, miss out on all these events with people you used to consider your friends or family.
Yeah, I actually got a personal story on that account where my grandma, she was a temple worker for a very long time. In her later years, she decided to spend a lot of her retirement in the temple because that seemed to be a very charitable thing to do. You're helping these other people receive these saving ordinances for them, And so you're doing a lot of the work of like, washing the garments or washing the, the clothes you have to wear inside the temple. You're just doing a lot of the things to make the temple work. And so she would go into the temple at least once or twice a week to do her volunteer hours. And I wanted to attend with her on that particular occasion. And she was going to show me where the temple workers work and like lead me through the temple and that kind of stuff. So I go up to the desk where I'm supposed to show my temple recommend. And at the time I was not a faithful Mormon, but I hadn't decided to leave yet. I was, not believing anymore, but I hadn't like decided like, oh, okay, I got to get I had to find the exit door. Right. And so I showed what was, to my knowledge, a valid temple recommend to the person at the desk. And he scanned it and he said, oh, hold him up. Let me try to scan that again. And he scanned it again. And he said, nope, you're not authorized to enter the temple. And I was like, what? That's crazy. This must be a mistake or something like that. Because I hadn't, nobody had told me that my temple recommend had been canceled. My uncle did it for me. He actually, after I told him that I really didn't believe in Joseph Smith and the whole story that they talk about in church, he had actually gone and canceled my temple recommend for me.
Wow.
And didn't tell me.
That's an interesting way to find out, I guess.
Yeah. So I was standing
They didn't
there.
try and talk to you or have any elder meetings before that? They just kicked you straight out? Nothing?
I think he felt like, there's no way he would ever want to go to the temple, because if he doesn't believe Joseph Smith was like ordained by God or something like that, then he wouldn't want to go to the temple. And I'm like, but both sides of my family are Mormon. Like, I'm just trying to be supportive, and just like go with my grandma and spend some time with her, on a Wednesday or whatever it was, and unfortunately I learned right there, at the entrance to the temple that I wasn't allowed in.
That's kind of a crappy way to find out, I guess. Damn. Yeah. All right, but all that questions about tithing, we'll figure out where does that money actually go.
For many years, the Mormon Church has been stockpiling $1 to $2 billion of surplus tithing into a reserve of the reserves inside a 501c3 nonprofit called Enzyme Peak Advisors. This year, 2019, Enzyme Peak Advisors grew past $100 billion in market-based, non-real estate allocated capital, with approximately $44 billion in U.S. stocks, $12 billion more internationally, $27 billion in bonds, $6 billion in private equity, $10 billion in hybrid instruments, $3 billion in portfolio cash, and another $4 billion in treasury cash. These investments have been producing annual returns of close to 7%. That means that Enzyme Peak Advisors grows by $7 billion each year from capital gains, dividends, interest, etc., plus another $1 to $2 billion each year from excess tithing. All church operations consume between $5 and $6 billion per year of tithing. It is officially, finally true that the Mormon Church could tell every member in the world to completely stop paying tithing now and forever, and it could continue to fund every current program in full without drawing down on the reserves. In other words, Enzyme Peak Advisors would continue to grow. This is true in large part because, as a 501c3, Enzyme Peak Advisors has enjoyed a tax-exempt status. It has garnered about $20 billion in tax breaks in total from the American public. All 501c3s, regardless of their classification or type, have an expectation of doing something religious, educational, or charitable, something in the public good, with their assets from time to time. Enzyme Peak Advisors has never spent even one dime on anything religious, educational, or charitable in 22 years since it was incorporated in September 1997, which is 1 month after Times Magazine wrote its cover story entitled Mormons, Inc., exposing some of the Mormon Church's assets at the time. Enzyme Peak Advisors has no tax-exempt purpose. It has literally no liability stream, no calls for capital, and no plans for using the money at all.
So this is an investment firm under a 501c3 that's making $7 billion a year.
This is brilliant. I'm taking notes here.
All right. Yeah. It's like, all right, we're day trading Mormons now. That's our next job.
Exactly.
The Mormon Church is the second largest private landowner in the United States.
Yep.
So I believe BlackRock's number one, and like the Mormon Church is number
BlackRock
two.
and Mormons. We have White Rock, White and Blonde Rock, and then we have BlackRock. Yeah.
Wow.
The mandate given by the First Presidency and the presiding bishopric is to only focus on financial growth. EPA employees are told that the money will be used after the second coming of Jesus Christ or during Armageddon.
Wait, is that actual doctrine that we're saving the money for Christ's second return? I know there's still a couple Mormons in the chat. Is that real?
I don't think they get up in front of church and tell everybody, hey, we're hoarding this money. But they want it to rain like gold. Like, it's got to be like, when he comes back, we're throwing the biggest worldwide party on the planet.
There is no reason why that couldn't work within just regular old Christian doctrine. I need to start one of these 501c3s. This is brilliant.
Jesus got to get those rims, man.
The spinners.
Yeah.
A few private jets. Oh man.
People are talking about it's like the next DLC is just raiding a Mormon. Not the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve has no money. The Mormon Reserve, that's where it's at, baby.
They do have they do have vaults on the side of a mountain. They actually dug out a huge part of the one of the mountains, and they actually have huge vaults.
That's the Lockheed Super Mormon soldiers, dude. That's where they come from.
Yeah, bro. They've been breeding those boys for years, for generations, okay? They are super soldiers in there. I don't think you want to mess with that security team. No, but that's funny. We talked about this a little while ago, but the Catholic Church is the richest when you include assets, for sure. Like the architecture, the land, all of that is incalculable. How much the icons, the
artifacts,
relics, just incalculable, right? But number two, at 1/800th the size of like Protestants or 1/400th the size of Orthodoxy, number two is the Mormon Church. Yeah. Brilliant investment schemes, rigorous tithing, almost no expenditures because I believe most of the ecclesiology is unpaid.
Yeah, it's volunteer.
Yeah, so they don't pay on cleaning services like for the churches or anything else like that. It's all volunteer work and such. Like,
wow. Yeah. So I can give you some history now if you want of like the church's financial history a little bit.
Okay, I gotta run for 1 second, so I'm just gonna hop off. But yeah, feel free to talk about that, and then I'll come back and I can play the video.
All right. So basically, I don't know the whole history of the church's finances, but I can tell you that the church was broke several times throughout its history. It was bankrupt. And the history of teaching tithing in the church kind of follows the church's financial history, where when it was on tough times, it kind of emphasized tithing more, where it, maybe was a little bit more flush with funds. It emphasized a little bit less. But the last time that the church was really on dire straits financially was in 1973. Now, in 1973, the church was almost bankrupt, or practically bankrupt, and the church was like, man, we're in this cycle where we emphasize tithing, we get a lot of tithing in, but then people kind of fall away from doing tithing as strictly, and so then we start hurting for funds. And so they said, well, we really need to start investing this money. So they started emphasizing tithing a lot, but they decided instead of just directly putting that towards expenses and saving the extra, they decided they were going to invest. And they specifically decided they were going to invest on J Street. So this coincides conveniently with when they decided to allow blacks to receive the priesthood back in 1973, almost as a condition that, hey, J Street will take your money, but you have to change your doctrine so that it's, we're not dealing with, people that are kind of outside the mainstream at the time. And so they changed the doctrine. This was a big, quote unquote, revelation. Huge change in the church, probably one of the biggest changes ever in its history. And then suddenly they get in bed with J Street and start investing to the tune of $20 billion, So,
yeah. I still don't like that camera, dude. That thing freaks me out.
Well, it tried to track me out the door, and then when I came back in, it was like looking up into the corner, so I had to manually bring it down. My bad.
I think we can run it, the video.
Oh, sweet. All right, here we go.
Get him right before he would come again. The IRS would not view these as legitimate tax-exempt purposes. In addition, Enzyme Peak Advisors has engaged in 2 misapplications of funds that are contrary to its articles of incorporation and therefore unlawful. In 2009, it bailed out Beneficial Financial Group, owned by Desert Management Corporation, which is owned by the Mormon Church, with a $6 million check that came from Enzyme Peak Advisors' treasury account, which contains only never invested tithing surplus. The second misapplication of funds went to cost overruns associated with the City Creek Mall, with $1.4 billion being paid out over 5 years to finish construction. Despite many public statements to the contrary, this was also paid for using never invested tithing surplus from Enzyme Peak Advisors' treasury account. Enzyme Peak Advisors' tax-exempt status may be pulled, even retroactively, for having never made any religious, educational, or charitable distribution in 22 years, and for 2 very serious misapplications of funds. In addition, the Mormon Church's tax-exempt status may also be pulled into question, as it would likely not pass a, quote, commensurate test with the IRS, meaning that it is now so financially large and entangled that it actually behaves more like a business than a church, and should be taxed accordingly. The Mormon Church has made several intentionally deceitful statements that, in my opinion, do amount to fraud, especially by its presiding bishopric. For example, Mr. Gérald Caussé, presiding bishop, gave a talk in 2018 entitled Financing Faith, which is available at newsroom.churchofjesuschrist.org, which quotes him quoting President Hinckley, quote, "The combined income from all these business interests is relatively small and would not keep the work going for longer than a very brief period," close quote. This is very disingenuous to say in 2018. It is clear that the combined income from Enzyme Peak Advisors' investment returns alone, to say nothing of all the other revenue-producing assets of the Mormon Church, is greater than all the tithing that is contributed by members each year. It is enough to keep the work going for much longer than a very brief period. Right now and going forward, it can support the work in perpetuity. The monthly dues for missionary service are increasing from $400 per missionary per month to $500. With 70,000 missionaries, the total annual dues are $336 million. The reserve of the reserves in Enzyme Peak Advisors grows each year by 23 times.
What does that mean? Cost of missionary service.
So Mormon youth are encouraged to serve a mission. It's 2 years for men. It's a year and a half for women, and you pay to go on a mission. You or your family, have to finance your mission. You actually have to pay the church. And sometimes if there's like a member of the church that's not well off financially and they want to go serve a mission, the church will come together and finance their mission. The church could pay for every missionary they have actively serving, preaching, the Mormon gospel out there to the world. And it would not even be a rounding error to the amount of interest they make. And that's on top of they make you clean the ward buildings, right? They can't even pay a janitor to employ one of the hard off Mormon members to just clean the building, right? They couldn't even do that. It's like, oh, you got to come on Saturday. I did this a lot growing up as a kid. Like I'd have to go on Saturday. Hey, I love to go play with my friends, but we got to go clean the church building.
Yeah.
So
Wes, did you go on mission?
No, I didn't serve a Mormon mission. That's a prerequisite to going on your mission is going through the temple.
Oh, okay, gotcha. It's only for post.
Yeah.
Temple.
My bad. Sorry, I was muted there. I was going to say, so the church brings in $7 billion a year in interest on this EPA, conglomerate of different, stocks, bonds, land, whatever it might be. And then the entire cost of their 70,000 missionaries is only $336 million, right? So, 23 times that amount just in interest that they pull in.
Yep.
But they're so stingy with the money. and but their investments are so good, and they keep their costs so low by just not paying anybody, that they've amassed this insane fortune off of only 1 million members.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. It's just really. They got in bed with the right people. You were gone, John, while I was talking about the church's financial history, but they actually sold out to J Street back in 1973. And so J Street has been basically handling their finances and handling their investments since then. So they've got the best of the best working on their finances.
See, that's my base. He's a Mormon in chat. Says, looking at it all wrong, it's an opportunity for members to serve. Well, I agree with you. Maybe that's the most generous framing you could possibly imagine. Like, for instance, our tiny local Baptist church sends people on missions. It doesn't, make them pay for it, which seems strange. Like we actively support our local missionaries and charities and whatnot, not ask them to pay us for the privilege of doing it. It just seems strange. It seems backwards to me, if you ask me.
Yeah, and the whole missionary work, like, that's obvious. Like, if you're going to have people go out there and spread, your good word, right? You would at least want them to make sure that they have, clothes on their back, right? Pay for their clothes. If they're going to have to ride a bike, pay for their transportation, right? If they're, if their basic living expenses just eating, food every day and, their lodging and that kind of stuff, you'd think they would pay for all that. But maybe except for the lodging, maybe they pay for the building they sleep in, but they have to pay for their clothes. They have to pay for their bike. They have to pay, everything that you see is what their family gave them as they walked out the door. And so it's just one of those things where knowing Mormon missionaries, family members, that kind of stuff, they try to get, we'd all say, talk as members of the family and be like, you got to get a Trek bike because you're going to be on that bike all the time. You're going to have to get something good.
Well, listen, this is a perfect marketing move, right? So not only do the people evangelizing for you have to pay you, but the people they convert then also have to pay you.
Yes. Yeah.
This is great. This is a wonderful money-making scheme. I love this.
So maybe we
get Christian science fiction or Christian fan fiction. This is amazing.
Maybe I'm getting into the weeds here, but say you're on mission in a foreign country here and you're riding your little bike around and you fall and you break your ankle. Do you have health insurance or anything through the church, or is that all on you?
I'm not going to speak to whether or not the church will pay.
Well, I can. Sorry, go ahead.
I can't speak to whether or not the church will facilitate your medical treatment.
Okay.
But as far as I understand, there's no benefits that come along with being a Mormon missionary. It's not like you sign up for hey, here's your health insurance plan and that kind of stuff. I'm pretty sure that's out of pocket.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense.
So a video I was watching of, again, Alyssa Greenfell, she told a story about being on mission, and the kids were, because they're 18 years old, right? They were playing games too hard. You aren't allowed to play a lot of sports for fear of getting injured. So they were playing, what's that hacky sack game where you flip it, or you try and bounce it out of your opponent's corner or whatnot, just a generic schoolyard game. But they were playing too hard, so the elder or the person in charge of their little mission group told them to stop playing. So they are very sensitive to you getting injured because they do not want to pay out anything for that.
What is the international mission scene like in the Mormon Church? I see it as being mostly a Utah phenomenon, and then more broadly an American phenomenon. Is there a large group of Mormons internationally? Is that something that they're trying to increase the population of? What does that look like, West?
So the church is really mostly successful in the English-speaking world. It's very difficult for the church to really gain much of a foothold for a long time in places like Latin America and that kind of stuff. They may have a lot of members on paper, but they have very, very little retention, where you might have a branch or something like that that's supposed to have 200 members and it only 40 people show up, right? And so the church is very reluctant to purge its roles of inactive people because there's a lot of them, especially in foreign countries, because the missionaries that go down there, they stay for 2 years, but they get moved around, and they're encouraged to get as many baptisms as possible. And there's a history in the church of baseball baptisms where missionaries would go down to places like Mexico or Guatemala or wherever, and they would start like a baseball team, or like they get all like the local kids to play baseball, and then they would baptize them in order to be like a part of the baseball team or something like that.
Like that scene in Nacho Libre where he surprise dunks him in the bowl.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where the numbers outside the English speaking world are kind of nebulous, and there's really not a really sizable presence. There are a couple places that have a sizable Mormon population by percentage. That's actually kind of surprising. So like Guam, for example, Guam actually has a sizable Mormon population, and some of like the Polynesian islands.
Yes, Tonga is one that they basically dominated by basically being the first to bring Mormonism or an outside religion, and then, you know, like schools and stuff like that. So it's almost like that they took over, they colonized the island of Tonga, which is quite funny. Like it's very, very high percentage of the population. Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah.
We bring up like owning property and whatnot too, and out here in Utah, the church buys a little portion of land on pretty much every single high school, and they erect a seminary school as well, which they attend. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's kind of part of your, not your school curriculum, but there's a time slot cut out of your day where you go across the street and you go to seminary.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's finish out this, I suppose.
Times that amount. The Mormon Church, via Mr. Dallin H. Oaks, boasts that it annually spends $40 million globally on all humanitarian aid efforts. It puts 50 times that amount each year into its longest term piggy bank, which is already now past $100 billion. The real estates in Ag Reserves Inc. and Property Reserves Inc. are another $20 billion approximately. There are many other reserves such as Deseret Trust Company, Deseret Management Company Reserve Trust, other holding companies, and many other property reserves. Speaking conservatively, the Mormon Church is now larger than $200 billion in assets. More than half of that is in the very highly liquid securities inside Enzyme Peak Advisors. For the full expose, please read the 74-page PDF that you can download from the link beneath this video. That expose contains 62 well-referenced footnotes, 59 endnotes, and 34 pages of exhibits featuring documents obtained from Enzyme Peak Advisors itself. I've also created a much longer video that walks you through the full story with some personal commentary, which is also available using a link beneath this video. This and hundreds of supporting electronic files were handed over to the IRS and to the media. Please like, subscribe, and share this information and your views on social media.
Yeah, so that's the whole expose that came out in like 2019, and it was a big thing inside Mormon land, inside Utah, that kind of stuff, because people had kind of talked about how much the church was worth and how big the temples were getting and how much money they were spending on them and that kind of stuff. But that almost seems like small in comparison to when you learned like how much their actual assets are worth. And something that was interesting in that at the end was the church used to only donate $40 million of that money every year. They, would give that to charity or give that to, relief, disaster relief efforts and that kind of stuff. And people used to talk about like, oh yeah, my tithing is like going to charity, man. Like, that's why I give tithing, because that's going to a good place. And they recently increased it to $1 billion after this expose came out, because they were like, okay, this looks bad. We're only giving like a fraction of a percent. And so they increased it to $1 billion, but that's still, a very small part of what they get in tithing every year. They get at least $1 to $2 billion in excess tithing on top of their operating expenses. And so it's, they're not even giving of the interest that they get off of those investments.
Right. What's funny, because that $40 million number, that is 0.5%.
Right.
0.5%, just over 0.5% of their annual interest on their $100 billion, which is funny because if you remember Bono, U2 singer, he has a charity called One, which is famous for giving away 1% of its annual revenue in actual charitable donations, but that's still twice as good as the Mormon Church up until recently. So that is quite funny.
Yeah, and it was crazy because an internal person inside the church had to basically leave employment with the church. You know, one of their financial people inside the church that managed this fund, and he was like so surprised at how the church ran its finances internally that he actually reported it to the IRS. There's actually an active lawsuit against the church, you know, through the IRS, that their finances are so whack. Because there's a thing where it's like in America, there's a separation of church and state, and there's a documentary that just came out about, like, you know, all the different tax loopholes that churches use to have like a private jet that's for the church, or like they have like a 400-acre, you know, private estate that's the church's estate, you know, but the founder happens to live on it, right? You know, there's like lots of different things in weird things in American law that makes it so that you can have these weird, you know, televangelists that have, you know, 2 private jets, a 400-acre estate, and it's all tax free, right? But the church, the Mormon church, is almost institutionalized that, where they've gotten so good at like end arounding the tax law that they can have $100 billion savings account that generates like $7 billion in interest every year, and it's all tax free.
I mean, frankly, I appreciate the hustles. This almost goes for
that's what
a
people
pro
are
column for me.
Crazy money they're making. I mean, wild. It's just funny that it's wrapped up in a quote unquote church, right?
Right, but when I say like this is why I felt like I couldn't like contribute to this organization anymore, and I felt it was really scummy when they were taking like some grandma's, you know, social security or something like that. This is why.
Yeah.
It's because I saw the inside from knowing, you know, my grandpa who was given a stipend by the church of being a general authority. He's one of the few, while he was working at church headquarters, he was one of the few people that actually get paid by the church. And so he got paid by the church. His car was given to him by the church. He got church lodging, you know, the place he lived, the apartment that he lived in downtown Salt Lake was paid by the church. So he accepted, you know, received a lot of benefits from the church. And to explain this to your average member, think about it like this. You know, there's the meme of what I receive and what you receive, right? So the church receives 10% of your income, right? Gross, if you're, you know, paying it like you should.
It is gross.
Yeah, you give 10% gross, right? And what you receive is you get to clean the building on Saturdays on a rotation. You have to pay for your mission if you serve a mission, and if you go to the Mormon school, you get discounted tuition, but you don't get free tuition. So you still have to pay to go to the Mormon school, go to BYU.
Right, and all of that so that they can pocket $6 billion dollars in interest every year on their portfolio.
Right, and so if you believe like that's a fair deal, right? If you feel like you're getting, you know, all of that money and more in return, and you know there'll be Mormons that'll swear up and down, yes, I get all the eternal blessings in heaven. I get to go to VIP heaven. You know, it's like this pyramid scheme where it's like, okay, I'm going to pay my way into a better spot in heaven, basically.
Right. Well, so that's my base, 614 in chat. Says, I understand the frustration about the church having a lot of money and the poor person tithing. It is certainly a sacrifice. Well, I think that what James was talking about earlier is I understand the altruism of people wanting to give donations, to tithe, to be, you know, all the sort of things. I totally get that. What I don't like is the apparent abuse and taking advantage of those people's charitable donations, right? Because those people are giving out of the kindness of their heart. They are doing what they believe to be the right thing, right? So it is, in this case, the Mormons church, their responsibility to be good stewards of that money, not for the sake of making more money, but for, you know, I would hope to do something positive with that rather than just stack up ones and zeros in some bank account somewhere.
It's all for the party at the end of the world, man.
Well, somebody else in that video commented in that video that we said, is like, well, I'm not really sure why they're saving up money for the end of the world, because at that point, I'm not sure how much that money is really worth.
The dollar's going to be fire starter. Yeah.
I don't know about that.
Like, to your point, John, like, I don't have an issue with the idea of tithing as a principle. Like, I don't like designating tithe funds. When I tithe to the church, I tithe to the general fund. If I tithe to a specific, capital fund or something where they're trying to get land or build a church, something like that, that's not even what I would consider part of my tithe. That would be something in addition. I tithe to the general fund because I do think that there is an element of trust built in from the giver's perspective when it comes to tithe. And I think that's a good principle. So I totally am aligned with the idea of that is good for the soul of the person giving. The question is, how is that money being used? That principle rests upon a trust in the organization to be a good steward of that money. And if that crumbles, if your faith in that organization crumbles, as I think it did for you, West, then I think that you should question even the principle of giving to that organization.
Yeah. Can I talk about fast offerings for a minute?
Go for it.
So there is an element of charity in the church, but it's not done through tithing. And this is the thing that it breaks it down even better for people outside the church of tithing is not for charity. That's not what the church sees it as, and that's not what they use it for. So what fast offerings are used, so fast offerings are something that you give in addition to the 10% gross of tithing. I, as a young man, would go around on Sunday mornings and knock doors of faithful Mormons and ask for fast offerings, because fast offerings is money that you give to the church that stays local in your area. It stays within your local branch or your local group of churches, and is used to help less fortunate members of the church with electric bills, car payments, whatever the church sees fit to pay for. And those fast offerings are gathered within your local area, and they stay local to your area. But the church never sends money back. It never sends money from headquarters to your local area to help with charity work. Your local area has to come up with the money in addition to the money that your members are already paying in tithing. So what I'm trying to say is that if it was really all for charity, right, then the tithing would come back, right? You would see some, hey, look, I'm, paying out in tithing, but this is helping the less fortunate in the church. This is helping members that really need it. This is going to the global effort, that kind of stuff. But no, it's going to this bank account where it's just accruing interest, because that's really all it goes to, right? Even if they pay $1 billion, I'm telling you that in the IRS the letter to the IRS, it exposes all of this, right? The money doesn't come back. Like, it goes to that Enzyme Peak advisors, and they run off of interest. The church runs off of interest. It doesn't run off of tithing. So it's just one of those things where, to your regular member, that sounds crazy. It sounds crazy that, like, oh man, tithing doesn't go to these charitable things I've been told about. It doesn't. If the church is giving to charitable causes, it's giving off the interest it made on your tithing, if anything, right? But that's just a portion of that. Yeah, the idea of fast offerings, where that comes from, is you donate a portion of what you would have spent on the meal on that day when you fast. But the main thing is like that's people give well in excess of what a meal would cost to help less fortunate members. But you have to be, there was really faithful Mormons that would give well in excess of, what they would normally give, because they're paying 10% already on their gross, and they're giving fast offerings to help people locally. So that's a lot of burden to bear.
Yeah, originally when you said fast offerings, I was like, oh, like quick pay or something like that. I didn't know what that was. But I mean, to be completely fair, though, I mean, I know we're talking about this in the context of Mormonism, but tithing is something that should be taken seriously across all denominations, right? Whether it's like, if you want to point to like Catholic indulgences in the Middle Ages, or like you'll hear it in like your local church, oh, the secretary got caught embezzling money, right? It's kind of the same thing, right? So these people giving out of their goodness of their heart, hoping to try and do something noble for their locale or for the church as a whole, and then the people at the top just abuse the money, right? And it's not purely just a Mormon problem; it's a problem with all churches.
Yeah, well, the church does take really seriously about the money. Like, they have clerks, which is like a position, a volunteer position in the church, but it's one of the most serious positions at your local church level. Every church building has a clerk that is responsible for keeping track of all the money. And if a bishop embezzles money somewhere and doesn't give it all to headquarters, that is the fastest way for you to get kicked out of the church. They may not excommunicate you and go through all that stuff, but you're going to be on the outs, in a minute. But when it goes to the headquarters level, how they manage the money, there's no transparency. right? They tell you they pass an audit, but they don't have to turn over anything. They don't have to turn any documentation over to the government because they're tax-free, right? They don't have to turn any documentation over to the members because they just get up in tech meeting and saying, God told us to spend it this way, so this is how we spend it. So until this letter to the IRS came out, we really didn't know where the money was going. And so that's why this was so significant.
And this is still a legal case that's ongoing, right, as to whether or not they can actually continue to operate as a tax-free 501c3, right?
Right. There might have to be some restructuring because there's never before in American history been basically like a hedge fund that claims to be a church.
And what's with the name? Enzyme Peak Advisors? That's such a weird
Enzyme
name.
is like a flag. So you're like the standard bearer. And
oh, Ensign, not I thought it was
enzyme,
like an enzyme.
like a biological term.
Right. Like a hormone type thing, yeah.
Evil weird. Incorporated 501c3.
Did you have anybody that wanted to jump on? And
we've got a number of people in the chat. I know Log Dog is doing a lot of commenting, but he says he's working a swing shift. That's my base.
Log Dog, that's my base. I'd love to have him on here just to chat in general because I have questions not only about like the finance and stuff, but I'd love to hear other people's opinions on their own religion. Yeah.
We're nice guys. We're pretty fair, I think. We joke around, but yeah. Even if you want to come on later. The email address is open. Feel free to shoot us a note.
Yeah,
and we can put you
like
on in the future. We can do whatever. We can have Wes back on. Yeah.
Like an impromptu debate or something like that. Not like a debate, but just like a discussion about the differences between generic Christianity and Mormonism would be fun.
I promise to any faithful members, like I'm not gonna bite your ear off, right? Like all my family, both sides, still faithful, that kind of stuff. I have Thanksgiving with them every year and that kind of stuff, and we're very cordial and that kind of stuff. It really just comes down to when you want to show people this stuff that most people don't know anything about, and even Mormons know this. Like there's inside Mormon world and there's outside, and so like most Mormons know about or most people on the outside know about like the magic underwear, and they might know about the missionaries who wear like the white shirts and ride the bikes and that kind of stuff. They wear the name tags. But they don't know much about the theology or they don't know much about how the church works. So this is just a deep dive into how the church operates, where the church doesn't respect, their individual members. They will spy on you if they think you're saying something controversial. And the money side of things is they'll take the money and use it however they please. They'll invest it into whatever J Street thinks is most profitable that year. So I just think it needs to be transparent to anybody that's trying to get into or that is hearing about the church, that, hey, this is a much bigger machine that you don't see from the outside. This is the second largest private property owner in the United States.
Well, and that's not even talking about some of the other businesses, right, that they're part of. Like there are many Mormon businesses, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. There's Deseret Industries, which is kind of like Goodwill, but it's owned by the church. The church has a lot of like positions and different things. Like it talked about there how they helped build the City Creek Mall, which is like in downtown Salt Lake City. So they have a position in that. They have big land holdings where they hold a lot of farmland and that kind of stuff. And there's actually people that go and work, members of the church that go serve missions and like work those pieces of property sometimes. Just different things like that.
I mean, you do have to give it to the Mormons too. They do have strong family values. They have a lot of children, and I mean, Utah's a very clean state, except for Salt Lake City's a little going downhill a little bit. But you got to give them some things.
Yeah, I will say like the Mormon members are great. Like I've had very positive experiences with a lot of Mormon members. Just growing up in that space and that kind of stuff, and even living in Utah for a time. All the people around me were very friendly to me, and I didn't feel like out of place at all. I didn't feel like people were like breathing down my neck or trying to.
That's very interesting. So, one thing, any Mormons that I've interacted with in person, I used to be in a summer swim league growing up, and there were a few Mormons on the team, and they were all just like the nicest people that you ever will meet. And that's what I've heard across the board when I talk to other people. The one exception that I've heard, just anecdotally, people have told me that in Salt Lake City, sort of when you get Mormons amongst other Mormons, I have heard that they can be very duplicitous, very, very two-faced. They'll talk about you behind your back. Is that a fair accusation, or is there some truth in that? Are we missing something from the outside?
Yeah, so Mormons really try to present a really nice face to the outside world, and they're generally good people. Like in general, like your average Mormon would give you the shirt off their back if they felt like you were in need. But the church creates a very toxic internal environment where, for example, the church doesn't have any good communication methods within itself, within your own ward. For example, you're like within your own church building, where if something happens and somebody, is having marital problems or something like that, the way it's handled in the church is you're supposed to go to your bishop and you're supposed to tell your bishop, like, hey, I had a fight with my wife, all this stuff's going on, right? But the problem is that it kind of leaks out, right? That's supposed to be a closed door meeting. Nobody's supposed to find out about it, but somehow it gets into the current, right? Into the gossip world. And the gossip world in Mormonism, it'll give you like a PhD in how to like say stuff behind somebody's back. Like, it's just like the gossip is intense because you're not supposed to talk about each other's problems. You're all supposed to put on this great face and, present yourselves as, very perfect people, or at least trying to be perfect. But everybody's got those skeletons in their closet that, people are whispering behind the scenes about. And so I think the gossip and the rumor mill is really intense.
Yeah, one of our Mormon chat members tends to agree. Is that something? Is gossip something that is actively condemned? In official doctrine. I mean, is that something that you guys? Is it just an accepted part of culture, or is it something that's seen as a problem from within the church?
It's seen as within the church as a problem. It's just difficult to root it out because at a certain point, it's actually necessary. Because say you're a bishop, right? You're a bishop that was chosen through, it wasn't like everybody voted, right? It was basically somebody chose you to be the bishop. Somebody above you in the church chose you to be the bishop. And now you're the bishop over this, maybe 300 people, right? And you have to make sure everybody's not fighting all the time, right? You have to try to make sure that those people sit over there in church and those people sit across the room over there in church because they don't like each other. And these people, they have problems with those people. So we got to try to keep all of this together. The only way you would really know about that, unless they came and told you, is that you have to kind of be within the gossip, right? You have to kind of hear it. And the bishop kind of needs people within the church to come and tell him, hey, I heard this from so-and-so. A little birdie told me this is what's going on with so-and-so. Then you can bring him in for a meeting and say, hey, what's going on? I heard this about, your family. What's going on? Are you fighting with this other family?
Right.
So it's very difficult to root out because it's almost necessary based on how they've structured their environment.
Well, and to be fair, this is a problem that you'll see in Christian circles as well, to various degrees. So
yes, very much so.
Well, good deal. I mean, any closing thoughts? Any other questions? There's all kinds of things we could get onto. I mean, we haven't even talked about the underwear and I mean,
or the
secret lives of Mormon wives, and there's all kinds of things we could.
I do have
talk
one
about.
question for you. Okay, so a lot of Mormons call it their shelf, right? Which is like a place where they put the things that don't quite jive with their worldview or don't quite make sense, and then eventually there's a breaking point for that. I am curious, what was the thing that broke your immersion, and then what was the first thing that you put on that shelf, quote unquote?
So the first thing that probably went on my shelf are things that really made me question was I was in weight training class one day in high school, and I was, getting ready to leave or getting ready to go into class. I can't remember, but I was in the locker room and a friend of mine or somebody in my weight training class just came up to me and said, hey, did you know Joseph Smith had 40 wives? And I was like, stunned because as somebody who had been a member for, almost 18 years at that point, I was like, man, this is new to me. I'm the person that's supposed to know everything, right? And this person from outside the church that knows nothing about it just walked up to me, and so I Googled it, and sure enough, he had close to 40 wives.
I think it was 34. Yeah, it was the number of official wives that he has.
I'm surprised that's not taught. I mean, it seems like you would want to prep people to be able to defend those sorts of facts, even just to their own mind. So there isn't an active internal apology that's presented for all of these classic. I mean, it seems like everyone outside the church hears about these things, but that's kept from the internal catechumens.
Yeah, that's not talked about in church Like you're never gonna get a Sunday school lesson about Joseph Smith's 34 wives or whatever. And so there is scholarship on it. There's like Mormon faithful apologists, academics that kind of write about these different subjects, and you can find like articles online where they try to defend, well, he didn't sleep with his wives, it was just they were spiritual wives, and it was really all about heaven, and he's gonna have 34 wives in heaven, and he was marrying people that were already, he was getting married to people that were already married, which was something that most people don't know about, is that he would send some of these husbands on missions and then marry their wives behind their back. And that was
this started some of the original rifts in Mormonism, is that people would come back and then their wives would be married to Joseph, and it's like, well, this isn't exactly what I signed up for. You sent me over here and then screwed with my wife. Like, what's going on? And again, some of the women were as young as, I think, 13?
14 was his youngest wife.
14?
Yeah.
It reminds me of the old joke from Norm Macdonald where he's the setup is that he's talking about how people would tell him that he had a cult following. He's like, well, that sounds really nice. Especially when you consider that when you're a cult leader and you have a cult following, that means that people worship you basically as a god or at least a prophet. And then eventually you get to sleep with all the women in the cult. If you want to, you can sleep with all the men in the cult. Having a cult following and being a cult leader is great. But when you're a comedian, apparently all having a cult following means is that most people hate you.
It's a little different.
There's an interesting part of church history actually about what happened with Joseph Smith's wives after he was martyred. And I think it kind of shows like a turning point where if things hadn't been handled in the way that they were, if things had been handled differently with Joseph Smith, that the church probably would have ended back in the 1860s or whenever, shortly after Joseph Smith died. The idea of having scores and scores of wives was a very rare thing after Joseph Smith, and one of the only other people to really have that many wives in the church was Brigham Young. But Brigham Young was the prophet that was chosen after Joseph Smith, but he decided to take all of those spiritual wives, quote unquote, that Joseph Smith had and bring them on as his own, which was actually at the time a very noble and responsible thing to do, because you had to understand that after Joseph Smith died, nobody was going to marry these women, right? After Joseph Smith had died and these women were left on their own, they were almost, kind of seen damaged goods, right? You're already been married, but you're married to this guy who's been killed. I don't want to get the second chance on that. So they basically said, Brigham Young said, look, we're not doing this anymore where, each prophet's not going to have 40 wives, right? But I'm going to take these women into my residences so that they have a place that they're taken care of. They have a place to sleep. Their children are taken care of, right? That way they don't starve, because this is going to look really bad to everybody else in the church if Joseph Smith dies and then all of his wives suddenly are, just cast to the cold,
So how long did it take for polygamy to officially become condemned in the church?
That's a good Google question. I don't know the year. When?
Okay.
Well, that was a big contention, which is why they were forced to move west for a long time before eventually settling in Utah. Was they wanted to kind of start their own city-state almost, and then they had to get pushed out, and there was a kill order on them for a little while in one of the states. It's a very, very wild story.
Yeah, 1890 is when polygamy officially ended in the church, and there's a lot about that where I've actually got a polygamous marriage in my family history, where in the trek over to Utah from the eastern seaboard, one of my great however many great grandmas, her husband died in the trek over to Utah, and she remarried to a man who already had a wife, and she basically joined him for the rest of the trek, made it to Utah, and lived basically with him for the rest of her life. So I don't think they had any kids. She already had kids at that point, but a lot of Mormon people will say, well, polygamy was just practiced in extremis, right? Like just when you needed to have polygamy because there were so many Mormon men that were like getting sent on missions, that had to join the Mormon Legion as a part of the army. The Mormon Legion was like a group of conscripted Mormons that fought in the American-Mexican War. And so they were getting sent off to war. They were dying of, malaria or whatever, trying to cross the plains, so therefore we had all these women and children around, and we had to practice polygamy to like make sure that everybody was taken care of. And to some extent that's true. But when Joseph Smith did it at the beginning of the church, you know what it looks like. So.
Well, and that's kind of an interesting question, talking about the extra wives, because the women can only be sealed to one man. So what happens to the 34 wives that were sealed to Joseph Smith, and then also sealed to the next prophet after him?
So what happens is that the church has a sealing and cancellation committee, which my grandpa was served on while he was at church headquarters, and that's how he met Elder Dykes. So that's where's their common connection. And basically what happens is, say, a husband and a wife in the church, they get divorced. And it's for something super serious, like spousal abuse, something like that, right? The wife can petition the church to have her sealing canceled, meaning that she can say, like, look, I know that I'm divorced legally with this person, but I would really not like to spend all of eternity with them because they're kind of a dirtbag. And so,
well, yeah. So who were those women sealed to then? Were they sealed to Joseph, or were they sealed to Brigham?
So I guess the church probably says now that they were sealed to Joseph, but then whichever ones remarried to Brigham Young, their sealings were canceled, and then they remarried. Their sealings were canceled, and then they got remarried to Brigham. I'm guessing.
So does Joseph not have any wives in the afterlife?
Whichever ones didn't get remarried, I guess.
Okay, I was gonna say. Imagine dying, being like, well, at least I have 34 wives for all of eternity, and then later on you're like, Brigham? He took all of them, every single one. Forever celibate in the afterlife. That's funny.
Yeah, but it's really hard to get a cancellation of the church. Like there are a lot of women that petition for years, very stringently, to get their sealing canceled. My mom and dad divorced. Just happened to be my grandpa was in charge on that committee, so that was pretty easy for her. But unfortunately, a lot of Mormon women in the church really try to, look, I really don't want to be with my rapist for all of eternity. Like, can you please cancel this?
So what is the church's stance on divorce? Is it similar to the Catholic Church, or do they allow divorce for civil reasons?
Yeah, basically their stance is like divorce happens. The rate of divorce inside the church is about the same as it is now outside the church. You can look at the statistics on it. It used to be that Mormons would stay together much stronger inside the church maybe 20 years ago, but the statistics now show that it's about the same. It's about 50-50.
Wow.
And the real reason for it is because Mormons get married really fast. It's very unusual to see somebody that's been dating for more than 6 months and they haven't already made plans to get married in Utah, especially, where if you're a return missionary, if you're a man, right? Utah County, for example, where BYU is, there's one man for every 4 women in that county, just on population alone. Not saying every one of those people is Mormon, but just in that county alone, based on population stats, every man has 4 women. So, it's the youngest place in America around BYU, because there's Utah Valley University, which is like a local school, and then there's Brigham Young University, which is like the church school. And so those 2 colleges combined make that part of Utah one of the youngest places in America. And so when you come back from your mission as a return missionary, this is from what my cousins tell me that have come back from serving missions. It's kind of like you have your choice, right? Hey, do I like this girl? Do I like this girl? But you have met the requirements for marriage, right? So you're going to have a lot of women that are going to be pursuing you, and there's going to be a lot of, pressure to like choose one, right? Because before you can have any sort of, just based on Christian theology and doctrine, you're supposed to get married before you have any sort of sexual relationship, right? And so there's a lot
unless you bounce a bed with a buddy or something like that.
Unless you bend the rules somehow with like soaking, all sorts.
Okay,
of
so tell me, is soaking really a thing, or is that just an outsider attack, or is that really?
It is a thing that happens sometimes in BYU. Mormon youth try to come with all sorts of like end around corner case ways that they can basically break the rules without breaking the rules.
And what's the basis for that? For soaking specifically?
Because they're not doing the action themselves.
No movement, right? Something like that.
Okay.
Somebody else is bouncing the bed for you.
Is that based on a particular text of Scripture or Book of Mormon, or where does that come from?
So it's really about like the Mormon Church comes up with rules, but the rules are kind of ambiguous. So, for example, like the tea and coffee thing. So it used to be that almost everybody in the church kind of understood, like, you don't drink tea and coffee because of caffeine, right? And so people like avoided soda and like energy drinks like Red Bulls, right? Because it's like, oh man, like the caffeine must be bad for you, and the church doesn't want you to drink caffeine, right? But then they came out and clarified, and there's some weirdness about they might have taken a position in Pepsi at the same time, where they decided to invest in Pepsi. But anyway, the point is that they came out and they clarified, actually, soda's okay, Red Bulls are okay, Monster energy drinks is fine. We just can't drink tea and coffee. And everybody was like, well, that doesn't make any sense, because like a Red Bull, you can be like chugging Red Bulls and like 5-hour energies all day, but like tea and coffee, that's like no go. Can't have some coffee on your break, but you can drink like a 5-hour energy. Like, that's crazy. So anyway, the rules don't always make sense. And so some people try to, find loopholes where they can, where it's like, well, maybe it doesn't really mean that.
Right. Well, that's like trying to follow the letter of the law while obviously not following the spirit of the law. Because it's like, well, technically I'm not moving, she's not moving, we're just like I don't know, man. I don't know. It's kind of like in modern day Judaism, where they transfer their sins to a chicken and then kill the chicken to satisfy the penalty or whatnot. It's kind of like if you're trying to trick God by using the absolute letter of the law, like, I think you're off base. You're doing something wrong there.
Yeah, I feel like Mormons, they have a lot of rules, right? And some Mormons really they pride themselves in being like a rule follower, right? They're like, I follow all the rules. I even follow the rules that nobody really follows, right? I don't watch R-rated movies because I'm told not to, but I don't even watch like movies with like gore in them. Like, I can't even watch a PG-13 movie if it's like too gory or something like that. Or, some people are like, oh, I can't have, there's like old rules that I heard from my grandparents where it's like they couldn't, my dad growing up couldn't have playing cards because like just the insinuation that you might use them for poker and you might gamble with them. So they couldn't have like playing cards in the house. I wasn't allowed to have an Xbox or like any sort of gaming, but I could have a PC. Like, I could have a gaming PC, but I couldn't have like an Xbox growing up. So there's different rules that don't really make sense, but people kind of like try to follow them to like really strict standards.
What about birth control? What's the church's position on birth control?
It's a very good question.
No birth control, baby. As many kids as possible.
Yeah.
They really don't take a super strong position on birth control. They kind of, I think, learned that they should kind of leave that up to a doctor, basically. They say that you can do whatever is medically necessary. And I mean, if you're a Mormon woman and you want to have any sort of birth control prescribed to you, and basically tell your bishop like, hey, the doctor told me I had to have it, and whether that's true or not, the bishop kind of just leaves it there usually. So it's not a super controversial thing in the church, at least not anymore, because for the most part they just say, do what your doctor tells you.
What about abortion?
Abortion is definitely on the other side of things. They're very pro-life. They say like you shouldn't kill your baby for any reason except for like the utmost medical necessity. And even like cases like rape and stuff, they're kind of wishy-washy on, like maybe you should have the kid and just give it up for adoption, or that kind of stuff. But I think the Mormon Church, when it comes to like cultural issues, I would agree with them like 9 out of 10 times. But there was like an interesting time during COVID, right, where like COVID happens, right, and the government tells the Mormon Church to shut down all the churches. And this is like a chance for the church to like stand on its principles and be like, no, we will not go down without a fight. Us versus the government. Like, we will not shut down the churches. We will have in-person meetings. And they just folded. They just caved.
Yeah.
Well, many such cases, so they're not unique in that. But yeah, it is an act of cowardice nonetheless.
Yeah, because there was a lot of members that were like, man, we got to stand up for this. We got to say like religious freedom. We can have religious services, no matter what the government says. But no, they just said, do what the government says, stay locked down, take the jab, do whatever, the government tells you. And that's why I just say, like, if you're a Mormon and you think you're a part of like this based, insider group, we're going to be like the Amish. We're going to like survive to the end, right? We're going to be like the spark that rebuilds America. And it's like, well, the problem is that your church is already sold out. That's the problem, is they're already in bed with the same people that are making the country the way it is.
Do you know the rules on Plan B?
I have no clue. I haven't heard of anybody like I know that has taken Plan B. I don't know what their public stance is on it, but
interesting.
I think it kind of falls under birth control, where it's like, oh, if you get prescribed by a doctor, then that's the doctor. So. But I'd really, I'd like to come back on if you have another person that wants to, bounce things off and, say, hey, I think you were wrong about this. And, I can try to give another perspective. But the hardest thing is, like, a lot of this Mormon stuff is like very dry, where it's like, you can get into the minutia of like the Book of Abraham, for example. Was the funerary text, the Egyptian that Joseph Smith claimed he transcribed and translated the Book of Abraham from, does that Egyptian actually translate into what he said he did? It doesn't, by the way. It's totally different. He totally made it up. He looked at it and he was like, oh yeah, this is probably this and it's probably that. And then we actually got the Rosetta Stone and we're able to translate Egyptian. Right. And it's like, nope, that has nothing to do with it.
Were you taught any of that around the Book of Abraham, any of the apologetic for how to defend it, or were you taught like the catalyst idea where maybe it's not supposed to be a translation, but it's just like he saw the text and that inspired him to write what he ended up writing? Were you taught any of that, or did you just learn all of that stuff after the fact?
It's all after the fact. Like, the church really doesn't want to bring up these things to Mormon members because it starts putting questions in your head. And the more questions you have, the less satisfactory answers you're going to find. Yeah. But there is like a whole sphere of like the Mormon blogosphere, where my dad was actually a part of it. Like, he had like a Mormon blog where he would like post articles of like, this is how you explain the Book of Abraham and this kind of stuff and different things. And they just come up with these different mental gymnastics of like, well, it makes sense if you think about it this way.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I would just encourage all of the people watching, when it comes to Christianity, I mean, you'll see some issues. There are people that don't want to talk about certain things because of scandal, but in general, Christianity is pretty open to a fair examination of the facts. But from what I hear in Islam, certainly in Scientology, and from what we're hearing today in Mormonism as well, and pretty much any of the more illegitimate culty religions, there is a strong aversion to doing your own research and looking into it, because that might lead you to a different conclusion. Whereas some Christians individually will push against that, but on the whole, there is a much stronger culture of introspection, of research, and of a serious desire to know the truth. I mean, that's largely what this show is about, is trying to actually look at the facts as they are and understand what really is true.
Yeah, I really appreciate that there's people that are going through and really hold true to their faith and they feel really deeply about it, because when you talk to somebody who's knowledgeable about their faith and they can tell you, why they believe in it and why they think it's, why they think they're a better person personally about, because they believe in their faith, I'm always like, that's good for them. Like, whatever you believe in, if you feel like it makes you a better person, then that's really what I feel like is where you should be. The problem with the Mormon church is that it's never going to be a mainstream Christian, quote unquote, Christian church, as long as it holds on to this very orthodox way of seeing the world, which is the Mormon church is the only true church ever, right? Like, you had Jesus Christ who like restored the gospel, and then there was like apostasy for like a long period of time after Jesus and his first, apostles died, and then Joseph Smith brought it back. And so a lot of Mormons basically dismiss the wider Christian, theology, anything that other denominations have to add to Christianity, because they say, well, that was all apostasy. And so Mormons have the only interpretation that's allowed, basically.
Talking about Seventh-day Adventists.
Yeah.
That's another fun one as well.
Yeah.
At some point in the future, it would be cool to have a member on and talk about, or a former member on to talk about something a little bit more in depth.
We're getting some comments on Plan B, so let me just step on a soapbox for just a second about contraception and various forms of it.
James Rant, let's go.
So, as I understand it, Plan B is abortive, and that's going to be pretty typical amongst your Christian, your different groups. Some people would take a different stance, but essentially what Plan B is doing is it is preventing implantation. So there's two stages in terms of pregnancy. There's the initial conception, and then there's the implantation, where the egg first gets the egg and the sperm join. That's conception, and then it has to implant on the inside of the uterine wall, and you can increase the mucus layer around the uterine wall to prevent implantation, which is something that happens naturally as well. You'll have a lot of times eggs that are that do have the sperm that do not actually get implanted. So that's something that happens naturally. You'll very often have multiple eggs, and only one or two will get actually implanted. But you can actively take hormones to increase the thickness of that mucus to where it will not implant. And so, and that's the whole purpose of Plan B, is to take it's hormones that increase that thickness, as I understand it, to prevent implantation. So the whole point of taking a Plan B drug is to snuff out the life that you have created. If you believe that life begins at conception, which Christians traditionally do, then the whole point of taking a pill after the fact, after you've already had sex and you're just questioning it and you don't want to have a kid, so you take a pill to essentially snuff out that life, to prevent that life from implanting and then growing. So there are a lot of important ethical considerations when it comes to that kind of thing, but I do think that intent plays a huge role in it. So there's another question around, like, the classic birth control pill typically has a dual effect, where again, birth control is just hormones. You're taking hormones, or you're taking pills that will induce your body into doing things in ways that are slightly augmented from what it would naturally do in terms of its hormone creation. And so the traditional birth control pill will typically the primary intent is for it to prevent conception. But then it has a potential secondary effect of also increasing that mucus layer and preventing implantation. And so some people consider even the traditional birth control pill to be abortive in that sense. Whereas because if you are considering intent, then if you're taking birth control for the intent is to prevent conception, but there, as a potential side effect, you might have a lower percentage of implantation, which again is a part of a natural process, but you're just increasing the likelihood of that. But the intent is to prevent conception. Then some Christians will see that as being okay, whereas Plan B is always bad, because that's the intent is solely abortive. It is to snuff out that life that you've created. So,
yeah,
I'm not.
I did. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
I did a quick Google search to see if the church had come out with a statement or anything like that, the Mormon Church specifically, and they haven't come out with a position on Plan B specifically. They say that any decision about, decisions about contraception are private matters between married couples and God. So basically, they haven't come out. They're pro-life, but they haven't come out and said specifically that life begins at conception. And so because they've been kind of ambiguous about where life begins, it's kind of up to you to determine whether or not you think Plan B is an abortion or not.
Yeah, interesting. Probably be worth doing a stream in the future, because that is it is a fascinating discussion around contraception, around even natural family planning. Even within the context of the Catholic Church, which is very pro-life and very anti-contraception. The fact that they do allow natural family planning is very interesting when you look at the other theological reasons for being against contraception in principle. It's definitely a worthwhile discussion and pretty interesting. So maybe for another stream.
Yeah, well, that's a little look into the Mormon world. So,
well, yeah, I really appreciate you coming on, Wes, and reaching out to us and giving us all this info and insight. I mean, it's been a great chat, and I'm happy to have you on in the future, man.
All right. Well, my DMs are open.
Appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, man. Take it easy.
All right. Are we ready to press the out button, James? Unless you got something else you want us to...
Oh, I think I'm ready to close this. But again, the email address is open, regardingdoubt@gmail.com, and anyone is welcome to shoot us an email if you have a desire to come on for any reason, but specifically relating to this stream. If you are a Mormon, a current faithful Mormon, and you would like to provide a response, whether that's directly to West or to just provide a different perspective, we would love to hear from you. And if you have any other topics that you think are of interest, feel free to send that our way. And yeah, we appreciate you all hanging out with us. Go ahead and hit the like on your way out if you haven't already. And thank you all for being with us. Christian, John, thanks again.
Yes, sir. Have a good night,
Jensen. God bless.
All right.